Hello, my friends. Hope you're all doing well and appreciate you taking the time to look deeper and take a look at some things with me. I'm going to talk a lot faster than I have on some of these other ones. A lot of information. Also, side note, I will say it is a little strange talking to myself while reviewing documents that I made. That is it is a little strange. But luckily I have Captain Casey, my little favorite dog, is here, and I will let him be my ears since it is a little unusual. But we're gonna do it anyway, and I'm gonna talk fast. So, preface: this is not. We're not gonna. I'm gonna show you some stuff that you have probably seen 100 times. That's not what we're focusing on. I'm gonna show it to you only in part so that we can point out certain things, so that we can figure out what other reasoning we could have seen. And I tried to do a full, hour and a half breakdown in 3 parts on this, weeks ago, before we even got there. But it just absolutely would not upload. I never could get past 41%. It was really weird. But anyway, afterwards, and had some time to see some other stuff, and figure I'd tie that all kind of in together now and just roll it from here. So we're just going to kind of roll through this part so we can start picking it apart a little bit. So I think in general we all observed that there was just an absurd amount of marketing, if you will, about this event this year. This is very unusual because we've had these things going on our whole lives, and never at any time in my life do I remember anything other than in the newspaper days, date and time, based on where you lived, something like that, regarding an eclipse, best time to watch, and, maybe if you were super into it, you'd probably go find, some more in-depth stuff, but it was very niche. But that was about the extent of it, and they tell you, precautions, how to not, hurt your eyes. Outside of that, I don't recall anything else. So, this was just very unusual. And I started noticing that as soon as it became what appeared to be marketed. It just strange enough to dig into, of course, and I can't help it. If I see things that don't make sense, I'm going to investigate it. I don't care where the evidence goes. This point in my life, bias on information is just useless. I don't intend on being right. I intend on getting it right. So where a correlation or a contradiction or something that doesn't add up to me, if I investigate it, I'm gonna just follow it where it goes. If it undoes something that I was under the impression of, well, that's great, because that means I let go of something else that was a lie, and now I'm moving forward the right direction. So I'm trying to constantly be in a continuing process of getting it right and evolving that, rather than trying to be right based on what I already know and be stuck. And you can't learn from that position. So that's how I observe things, and that's when I pick things apart, and when I start trying to figure out what I'm connecting to what and what I should look into closer. So anyway, based on all these eclipse things that y'all saw, eclipse from October of 2017 and the one that we just had, people were showing correlations from that, where those intersections were going to land. There was a northern intersection, southern intersection, X's appear, and I'm sure you saw all this. So that is a part of this, but I really want to take a different angle on it completely. More angle of, if if we're looking at this from a certain perspective and accounting for certain things, then can we still apply those in a completely different perspective equally, and it still work? And so I kind of want to just dig in a little bit to some other ways of looking at this. And so the first thing, in general, there's kind of a celebration of the event of an eclipse, and then, everybody kind of moves on with life. And not always, but in the general history of eclipses, they usually correlate something that is not good. So it's usually not a great thing that comes after. It's usually a sign of something. Something usually follows it pretty quickly that is not good. There's some exceptions, of course, but the majority are not good. So, I've got these on the screen, some examples and things. I'm not going to just read this to you, screenshot away if you'd like. I just want you to be able to see the actuals here. There's lots of evidence of this, you can see. But just the point being that, where it's kind of sold to us is, hey, it's beautiful, and sure, it's nature, and it is something that we can look at and say, that's pretty amazing. And that is what it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're celebrating a good thing to come. A lot of these things in history correlated with some, pretty strange things throughout history. But what I want to look at here is, if we look at, like I said, these maps that we all saw, leading up to eclipse, where this intersection occurred and where the other one occurred, which I'll, get into the details and show you a little more about what I think was more important about that. And basically, so now you have, of course, the southern intersection. So you had here, and then there's another here. All right, so I just want to, point that out first so we can understand where we're going with this. So with those being our established points, those path lines, they actually highlight some much older, consistent patterns that have gone on throughout history. And those same correlations correlate across the world, so across the whole Earth. And that being that these paths that we saw, those paths also correlate to another set of invisible pathways, if you will. So, in addition to those locations, there's a lot of sites along this eclipse maps that are the sites of major architectural structures, things that are kind of, above and beyond, cathedrals, monuments, and also large amounts of Native American history and tribes and locations that involved human sacrifice and very established evidence of. So within these exact same paths, there's long histories and lots of examples of very important architecture, Native American tribes, really beautiful things, very ugly things. So kind of two ends of the extreme pole, but both present throughout these areas. And so one thing I kind of want to look at is, a lot of what people were associating, with biblical correlations was based on names of these cities, places that were found along these paths that correlate directly to biblical names of towns and cities and events that also correlated a major event. So that was what was one of the main foundations for biblical correlations here. And I'm not saying that there was not, but what I am saying is there's another angle that most people haven't considered, and it's because most people are just not aware of it. And that's because most of this stuff has been completely hidden and put out of main view, or thrown into some classification that, it has a a context around it, some sort of a stigma where you just really wouldn't even want to entertain. So a lot of that is being done so that we don't really pay attention or understand the actual significance of these areas. So if we're looking at, these different paths and, that there's significance here, what I'm, going to show you is more of how could man or mankind manipulate this kind of information so to present it to us a certain way to correlate us to certain things that maybe aren't actually happening, and is it really as difficult as we might think. So what I'll show you now, this is the correlation of the northern intersection of those pathways. All right, so this is Carbondale. Carbondale sits just in the area of southern Illinois on the northern edge of Kentucky, and there's like a bordering of 3 states there, okay? And this area is known as Little Egypt, okay? This is important because there's a lot of this Egyptian names of places that are all along this area. And, there's a whole nother trail of information as far as why Egyptian names of things. And now I will do another something on that, but that's hours worth of another a whole different path. So, but we're going to stick for now just correlating to this stuff here. That whole southern area, you got Cairo, Illinois. You've got Monk Mountains, important, okay? Little Egypt, because it's bordered by 2 major rivers, Mississippi and the Missouri, and also by the Ohio. So there's a trio of rivers there. So you have a tributary, deltas, and this is correlated to, what would be considered the Nile in, biblical correlation. So in addition to that, Carbondale, which is exactly where the intersecting is the main campus of Southern Illinois University. So that is what it is, but more interesting, so there are correlations to all of that, but more so, the Little Egypt name and where it came from, obviously, with connecting to biblical Nile River and so on, but also, Illinois was a free state before the American Civil War, so some of the residents in the area referred to it as Egypt because they're still owned slaves. So there's some of this still going on there too. But point being, this entire region has a very ancient Egyptian and biblical correlations to where and how things were named. So this is also the location, was the center of the Knights of the Golden Circle, secret group supporting Confederacy. And it was in the Union. So, in Union territory. So, a little strange there. Cairo panoramic map, 1885. So, correlating that to this area of southern Illinois. So, anyway, moving on, there's some additional things in that area that are important. So, one thing that I've kind of hinted and shown other things in some of the other videos, that truth in plain sight is a huge thing, and it's always happening. So what you're seeing in a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows, music, album covers, a lot of these things, even in cartoons, you'd be amazed how many truthful things they put right in front of you in a cartoon as predictive programming, so that if you see it there first, your subconscious mind associates it with fiction. So if it were ever to occur, you're going to default away from thinking it could be anything of that nature, because that's how your brain's associated it, and that's intentional. They do this all the time. So what we're looking at right here, there is an actual place in that immediate area that is right within the heart of these intersecting areas, and this place is Wakanda. So if you think Black Panther, Wakanda with a W, this is exactly the same, flip the W over. Maconda. So, interesting because in Maconda you find Giant City State Park, and just to the southwest of it you find Shawnee National Forest. So, national forests, Native American territory, and giants. And do your research. There's an abundance of evidence. Native American history and giants are clearly being hidden, deferred away from. They don't want anybody looking. There's parts of these areas you can't go to. Clearly, this is not natural. You can follow striations. There are very succinct cut lines. Nature doesn't cut 90-degree angles consistently in patterns. So, someone did this, is the point. And you'll, of course, get all sorts of other narratives. But the whole point of this is to look at what you can find for yourself and verify the information and see if the narrative they've presented you even holds up. Most of the time, I'll tell you, it's much like a house of cards. The narrative is so poor that if you just it just starts falling over, and you will amaze yourself how easily you might have fallen for something that they put right in front of you. And it's a wonderful thing once you start doing it, because then you see it everywhere and you welcome it, because it means you're letting go of things that aren't true. The truth will set you free. So every time you let go of a lie, your soul and your mind is lightened. And it's a very important thing. So investigating lies and things that don't make sense. Scratch a lie, catch a thief. So ancient giants throughout this region. I mean, it's well reported. Ohio River Valley, this is a major place for giants being found and for large amounts of what they will call mounds. Okay, these are not mounds. As you can see, there are very clear angular cuts down steps. This is the top of a very ancient pyramid. And if you do your research on this, there are more ancient pyramids in the United States than anywhere in the world. And in fact, many of them are much older. There are pyramids all over the earth that are older than the pyramids in Giza. So they want you to keep looking over there, while these are sitting right in the middle of the United States, all over the place, throughout all of these Native American regions. So it's an important point. So again, the Kaskaskia Reservation, Giant City State Park, Maconda, Trail of Tears. Trail of Tears is also found somewhere else that we will see later, that I'll point out to you. But it actually correlates directly to the southern intersection that runs through Texas. Some more details on Maconda, Fort Jackson County, Illinois. You can take some screenshots there. I won't read it all to you. But the reason I point those out to you, and a lot of these areas that had Native Americans and reservations, there's a lot of national parks. And national parks, in the early 1900s were created by President Teddy Roosevelt. And it was under the, operating narrative that they were protecting, preserving, the most beautiful areas in the country from being developed in the future to preserve, what was originally here and what was natural here. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's beautiful. But it also looks like, because in almost all of the major ones that you go to, there are large amounts of areas that are highly restricted, and you cannot go anywhere near them. And people have disappeared many, many times. Do some research on people gone missing in national parks, and you'll blow your mind. So there's obviously something in these areas that is not intended to be seen by the public. So that then makes you kind of wonder if, is there a primary reason for these national parks being built that was not actually to preserve the nature of it, but to hide some of the nature that was already there? And Suspiciously, they're all areas that were very much associated with Native American tribes and places that all had giants or evidence of giants throughout the last 100+ years. So it looks like there's a little more to the story. So perhaps they are hiding more than preserving. And there's some other reasons why this stuff may not exactly line up the way that it appears, even if you're not looking at it just through the mainstream vantage point. But when we think about this statement here, John D. Rockefeller, when I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. Okay, well, when we consider that John D. Rockefeller and the Rockefeller Foundation were the original funders, so they paid for, they created the curriculum, they promulgated the books, and created the entire United States education system that all of us went through. And this was his perspective, was as a creator of the nation. He's one of the early people to be trying to set a foundation for the future of the country to follow in education. But this is his perspective. So if you're the one creating the education system, but your goal is to create workers, then your goal is not to educate, it's to indoctrinate. And his perspective and quote show you why you probably shouldn't trust everything that we were told in the education system that we grew up in based on the people who built it. So, in addition, we'll take a look at the Southern so you can see as well the correlations to Native American history, giants, things being hidden, and that these are obviously areas that have some major importance, right? There's got to be a reason for all of these things to be in these certain areas through long amounts of history. There's all this area completely empty, undeveloped, nothing in it. But these particular regions across the country have long histories with lots of important things that have happened. So there's something else about these areas that's important. So this is the southern intersection of those eclipses. This is where, this is just outside to the west of San Antonio, Austin, in the Hill Country. The exact intersecting point is Vanderpool, Texas. So if we look a little closer at that area and the Texas intersecting overlapping area, you also have a Little Egypt. And Little Egypt was also based on a similar idea because it was actually owned by freed slaves, and they chose to name it that. And then in the 60s, that land was taken from them and rezoned for retail use. That's just a side note, but Little Egypt, so again, correlation with that northern intersection area. Also in this Hill Country area near Vanderpool, you have Enchanted Rock, which is a huge Texas, staple, and lots of Native American history and some pretty bizarre stuff too. And the history that goes with it does not really stack up considering the significance of it. So there's probably a lot more to that, and especially it being in this exact area that we're looking at. And I'm going to show you exactly why these areas are important. I just want to show you kind of what we're told is here and then what's actually around it. So in addition to Enchanted Rock, the legends of Enchanted Rock, you have the Crying Rock. There's a lot of legends of sacrifice, spirits. In the Del Rio area, there is Fort Clark Springs, where Brackettville is. And so where we saw earlier the Trail of Tears, there is also a Trail of Tears in Brackettville, Del Rio area, Brackettville, Fort Clark Springs, which is where the Seminole Negro soldiers were camped and where they fought out of in Texas. But the Trail of Tears is also present there. Very big and important Native American history in that area as well. I've spent a good amount of time there. So there's some very, very important Native American history in these areas. The amount of state parks that are all, Carner State Park. And when I'm talking about, areas that were significant either for good things or bad things, we're about, human sacrifice history and legends of and so on. And one of the counties that this area is located in, you see, is Uvalde County. And just very recently, you all know what happened in the city of Uvalde, which is also dangerously close to this exact same area. So there are some strange things there too. So found in this exact region, skeletons here, some of the largest that have been on record. University of Texas were the original caretakers of it, if you will. This, goes on and on. And again, the mountains. I said these are all over the United States, but especially throughout that area of the Ohio River Valley and throughout this region of Texas as well. In fact, all the way across, everywhere. Every state you can pretty well find some evidence of ancient mounds. So, again, same thing here. And we're down in the southern section. They give us the same reference, and it's the exact same picture that they give us when explaining it somewhere else. But pyramids. So now we've seen all the correlations to, these Native American areas and the importance of what may be hiding there. Let's look at what actually might be so important about those areas. So if you're not familiar with what are known as ley lines are like they're they're not latitude and longitude necessarily, they're intersecting, cross patterns that go all the way across the earth. Looks kind of like a highway system, but you cannot see them. So we have to understand that electromagnetic fields of energy are present throughout the entire earth, and all things are putting off some measurable amount of electromagnetic energy, and science has instrumentation that can measure this. And the electromagnetic fields that are measured have actually proven and correlated that these ancient ideas of ley lines, ancient civilizations were familiar with this idea. They knew where the energy centers were on the earth. They knew where to put themselves to be in an area that had natural energy, and that was important. So these areas have natural significance in the electromagnetic fields and energy they put off. And it's been measured, and you can do your research on this. The highest quantity of electromagnetic energy in a field measured on Earth is actually in the region where you find in northwestern New Mexico of Shiprock, New Mexico. That is a volcanic plug mountain that sits all kind of by itself. It's been used in several movies. Very cool. But that is the same region as Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, the Hopis, the Anasazis, they were all in that exact immediate area where this electromagnetic field is. So, high level of importance to the Native Americans, all of these very high level energy centers that were across the country. So, I'll show you a map of where these laid out, and people, like I said, these were established a long time ago, and were believed, but modern instrumentation has proven that there is much higher levels of electromagnetic energy along these lines than elsewhere, and significant more where they intersect. So, kind of think of them as, invisible energy highways that are running underneath the earth. So when we look at all the significance of these places, and then we start looking at, where these ley lines are believed to be, you see that it was Alfred Watkins in the 1920s that, kind of mapped this out for the first time. So you look at these stretched across the whole earth. You've got, anything from Stonehenge, Taj Mahal, Notre Dame, the pyramids of Giza. All of the greatest monuments and things that you'll find are all sitting on some sort of ley line or major intersecting area. And this has been going on for as long as we're aware of. And a lot of it was based on, ancient civilizations that did have that were a lot more advanced than we've been ever led to believe. They were tracking star movements. They were following and building things in conjunction with the stars. So for them to line things up consistently all over the world makes sense, because they were identifying these kind of areas, and that's where they wanted to set up shop. So if you look at these, the state capitals of all of these are all at a major intersection or on a ley line. So it appears not just the Native Americans were aware of this. Apparently, the founders and builders of this country were aware of this, and it looks like they certainly accounted for it while placing major cities on major energy areas. So like I said, these are a very, very much correlating a whole lot of very important things that can't be visibly seen. So when we're talking about this kind of electromagnetic fields and energy, we have to realize that energy in and of itself is not going to be good or bad. It's neutral. The user determines how that energy is used. So just like anything else, anything can be dangerous if the person using it wants it to be. So the intention of a person is always present, and free will of using energy for good or bad. So these areas of high energy, they can be used for very good things, they can be used for very bad things. So if you want to build a, beautiful cathedral that has, amazing things in it that help people and make people feel better, it will amplify that naturally through the energy that is simply present. If you want to do evil and dark things, and you conduct yourself in ceremonies and rituals of such, it will amplify the energy of what you're doing. Side note, CERN, sitting on the Swiss-Austrian border 7 to 8 miles underground, banging particles together, is sitting on a major ley line intersection. And I'm going to go on a limb that their intention is not to use the natural energy there for good things. So you can see this throughout the world when you're looking at certain things and where they're located, if you understand where these energy points are and how they're being taken advantage of and kind of how they're being used against us in a lot of cases, and why they're hiding what used to be there, because they don't want us to know the significance of these areas and why they're so important. So significance of ley lines and significance of all these areas. And point that I really want to make with that is, if you're high level in this game, and you can, however we're looking at it, you want to call them deep state, Illuminati, however you look at it, the people pulling strings at the very, very top of the top of the top, who is directing traffic to do things that are evil, that are manipulating the majority of the world? Because that is absolutely true. If you do your research for just a little while, you will quickly find out that every corporation and every major company that you're familiar with are all owned and umbrellaed by essentially four companies. And those four companies are shareholder owned by essentially three investment LLCs, and each of those investment LLCs owns about 33% of each other. So however you want to slice this pie up, there's a handful of people that hold all of the pie. So if you're operating at that level, you have to remember that JP Morgan said that millionaires study the stock market, billionaires study astrology. I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially that. So they're not looking at the same money system and looking at it the way we do. They're looking at things far bigger than this. And if you understand the manipulation of energy and things at this level, it's magic, dark magic. They're sorcerers, witches. That's the game. And they understand how to manipulate energy at a very high level. They also understand spiritual books. They understand how to manipulate the energy without it necessarily coming back on them. They leave the free will element in place so that we have to choose. So they'll essentially tell us the truth while they lie to us. Because the free will element's there, we have to choose if we believe it or not. So if we just believe what they tell us and we start taking action, then it was our choice. We didn't question. So they're not actually the ones always pushing the buttons. They convince us to. Because then it comes back on us. So the manipulation is very, 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 very high level. And they know what they're doing. And it's not an accident. So when you're playing the game at that level, you have to be very strategic with how you're going to manipulate and deceive people. With the amount of people in the United States especially that are religious, that read the Bible, and even at this point the number of correlations we're making people who are not believers at all, that don't read the Bible, making them look, because they're starting to go, man, what in the world? So, like I said, the basis of this was on the connection of all of these different towns and cities running up these conjunctions between these two major intersecting ley lines, which is exactly where those eclipses would overlap, and the pathway between, all the way up and down it. All correlated large amounts of biblical names of cities and towns, rivers, etc. And so, what we have to look at, though, is if we know that they're setting up shop with the state capitals and setting major things in certain areas based on these ley lines, and where Native Americans used to heavily populate, then why would we think that they couldn't just name every single town along this exactly as they wanted to? Because we know that the Chinese and other ancient civilizations were forecasting eclipses and celestial events 1,000 years in advance. So our modern NASA's and scientists telling us, this is going to happen on this date. Well, that's not really anything special. The Mayans were doing this. So, and we were looking at their calendar to look at correlations. So, that's not new. So, if you were the people building this country and you had an intention of deceiving a large amount of people, and you knew that especially you had provided them with a large amount of religion, and you know that book better than most, and you know exactly where this event is going to take place 100 years ahead of time, well, how long ago did they name all those towns? Within the last 100 years? Or less? How many times did those names change? How many times did the names of those towns change over the years? How many of them are still the same as they were when we first allegedly founded the country? Which, that very alleged. It doesn't add up. So if you can run a gag by just naming the towns and you're the one setting it up, well, you could correlate all kinds of things and have people go in all sorts of directions, never realizing why you're actually trying to do things in those areas and why you want people to gather in them. Because you understand the significance of the natural energy there, and you're trying to amplify something. They had something else they were going to do, and they wanted natural energy from people who were going to gather in these areas because of some correlation that they thought was going to happen. So, do we really trust the same people we know are coercing us constantly? Because if we look back, and I'm very much in belief of, because it's been proven over and over, you look at ancient, you have to correlate it and compare with ancient biblical prophecy. At the time a lot of those things were being said, of a future time and place of something is going to happen. That place was already established and it had its name. It was already established. You couldn't move the goalpost the same way. So now we're taking names of towns and cities from, approximately 2,000 or plus years ago, and someone in the last 100 years happened to name a series of them all along an arc across the Midwest that was going to correlate with an eclipse that they would have known about hundreds of years ago. If you're really this good at this as the people doing it are, that is not a hard game to run. If I sat here and figured it out and explained it to you in less than an hour, and this is what they do, it is not a hard thing to pull off. That's a pretty easy gag if you understand the background. Most magic tricks, no matter how amazed you are by them, as soon as you see how they did it, you're usually not impressed anymore. And that's what I tend to find about this, is the more you know, and the more you're seeking information that they're not providing for you through a mainstream source and agenda, you tend to find the evidence pretty easily, and it usually pokes holes like shooting a shotgun through paper, and it doesn't take much. So the idea that that's far-fetched or too elaborate, no, I just correlated it for you pretty easily. So, and I'm not a genius, so if I could figure this out or even come up with the idea, if I could even speculate this as coming up with something on my own, that would be pretty clever. But that's not what I do, and I just sniffed it out looking at information that's already available to us. So we'll leave that at square one, and so we're going to kind of leave off on, energy, significance of energy in certain areas, why those areas are being selected for certain things, what was supposed to have happened, what actually happened, actual proof we have that will show that it was not what we were told that it was. And then we'll look into why, and then we'll see who and background behind it and how far back this runs, which will eventually run us in a big circle all the way back to one point, and then we can kind of round out a much better understanding of what's going on and how did we get here and how can we see better at what is actually being done around us. And from there I'll try and take it to a finishing point so that we can move forward with better understanding and be able to see through some of this chaos and noise that's getting thrown at us from all sides, so that we can just simmer down and review. Because at the end of the day, none of this is about panicking or over-consuming or worrying. It's only about preparing. So if you know what's in your opponent's tool bag, you can at least plan accordingly. You don't have to be afraid of them. You just need to know what they do and how each one's used. If you know what each tool can do and how it might be applied, if you see something that looks strange and you know what kind of tools they have in their belt, one might stand out very obviously to you. And then you can easily discard it. And then it's not something you have to worry about. It just keeps you from buying something that isn't real. Peace and love, my friends, and I will check back in for part 2.